Who are we, if not the mark we leave on the world? At least that's how I would usually start video essays like this, with a distinct question and a comprehensive end goal to answer. But we already know the mark left by Nobara on all of those around her. Gege was absolutely kind enough to grace us with her backstory to introduce two people whose hearts would be shattered. It was also evident that Nobara was used to break Yuji, a feat only possible with the depth of their connection. And truly, what a waste to use her for something so pedestrian as a mental breakdown. For all that work, for all that buildup, Nobara deserves better in every aspect of her writing. My name is Esper, and I talk about things to a depth nobody asked for, and today you're going to get an unforgiving criticism of Jujutsu Kaisen's legendary fumble. There are many aspects to the story that failed upwards to get where we are now. And I say failed upwards because there were so many things that set us up to expect so much more that made this entire ordeal much more disappointing. But it also made Nobara such a good character. And there are others that I overlooked for the sake of suspending my disbelief that have now come back to punch me in the face saying, hindsight is 2020, you should have known, idiot. So let's go through this wheel of disappointment with a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying glass so strong you might even be able to spot the fucks that Gege gives. Starting with not having any mentorship. I debated a lot as how I want to approach this, and there is a certain overtly negative sentiment going around Jujutsu Kaisen right now for a good reason. It's challenging. And there's a certain challenge I face now. Do I approach this in a way that honors the previous moments of good writing of Jujutsu Kaisen, or do I view this in the lens of the train wreck that it has become? And you know what? I'm just gonna go with my gut here and talk about this in the way I see fit. The sliding scale approach, let's say. Harsh when I need to be and generous when I can afford it. Anime onlys, this is going to seem way harsh, but just so you know, you're going to come back here in like 3 or so years and you're going to remember how right I was. So let's start on this goddamn school concept. When we first encountered Nobara, she is subjected to a test from none other than Satoru Gojo, the strongest, back when that meant something and he wasn't in a box. He explains that countryside cursed spirits are different from city cursed spirits. We very quickly see Nobara's quick wit and abrasive personality. She's no slouch, and nor is she a pushover. Given the chance to survive or to save someone, she lays down her weapons and surrenders herself. With Yuji saving the child, though, she comes alive. We learn so much about Nobara in this one small interaction. She is tough, she's compassionate, she's wise, and she knows how to tactically crush her enemy. She went from abrasive to complex in a mere few moments. I thought at this point in the arc, we would then begin training. Gojo had evaluated the 2 new people in his care, and he would set them up for success. And that's only half right, the Yuji half. Nobara after this never gained so much as a sideway glance from Gojo to even acknowledge her presence. I don't know about you, but when I went to school, I had to go to class, do homework, and take tests. Jujutsu Kaisen, on the other hand, takes place in a school where nobody teaches, has taught, or ever will teach. We're made to believe we're in a school, but really this is a Thunderdome for children to fight for the amusement of adults. I'm only half kidding. We kinda got Nanami teaching Yuji, who by the way, not a teacher at Jujutsu High. Then Nobara's only direction are her upperclassmen, who are only a year older than her, and let me tell you, as a sophomore in high school, I was wildly unqualified to teach anyone anything. And nothing about this school makes sense. There's one teacher, one principal, and the kids are teaching each other. And we know why this is actually. It's because the school setting was a suggestion from an editor that Gege hated. I think this quote summarizes it all. To sum up, my first editor's opinion, he said it was an interesting premise. but the story was stale and too dark. He suggested that I rewrite the narrative into a school setting. Honestly, at that time, I thought, this guy is senseless. He's gonna make me write a school life story. Double exclamation point. But because of the desperation I mentioned earlier and the low expectations I had for myself, I started to redraw the outline and thought, well, if this doesn't work out, it'll be the end for us, right? He didn't really get along with them, and despite the fact that Jujutsu Kaisen retained this setting, it throws out every idea of what a school is. And Nobara is the first casualty of this, because we'll learn that the students kind of just know things and their education is irrelevant. There's no hard work or merit-based system. Black Flash, the single most impressive thing a sorcerer can do, is bestowed randomly. Everything is either trial by fire or rule of cool. Because of this, the power structure of Jujutsu Kaisen suffers. There's nothing reliable or logical about it. Sure, the fights are very cool, but the end result is just determined with a rationale just cuz. I delve really deep into this later in the video, so we'll leave that thought for now. I just want to very quickly compare this to the other shonen manga and how they handle power-ups. We're very graceful around here, but I made you this little display to kind of help you along with, power structures and what's kind of an effective system when you're trying to build a world that makes sense. So, we're going to start off with Naruto because a lot of people know this one, but there were literal exams that you had to pass. Remember, they're in a school. So, they had the Chunin exams. They had to learn certain techniques to pass. They had to take a written exam, if I remember correctly. It's been a while. I dropped it in Shippuden. It's been 15 years. So forgive me if I missed some of the details, but it was a school and they functioned like one. Now, let's get to Bleach and Hunter x Hunter because these are actually works that inspired Jujutsu Kaisen. And if you really, squint, you see a lot of Hunter x Hunter's influence on the power system that Jujutsu Kaisen has. But if you put it through, a blender. Bleach had a school setting, by the way, but they really, truly didn't pay any attention to it. Where Ichigo learned everything was Urahara's basement, where they trained him. And they made specific tasks that he needed to accomplish so that he can actually go and become a better Soul Reaper. There was a clear progression from point A to point B as to how Ichigo can get better and can get more powerful. Yoruichi is here. Hunter x Hunter, I think, is the best one to compare Jujutsu Kaisen to, not because Gege clearly very much loves Hunter x Hunter, but because Hunter x Hunter is not set in a school at all whatsoever. There is not a school anywhere you look. Gon has never done homework, ever. Does he know how to read? Maybe. Still, though, with this setup, with I think what Gege wanted, which is to not set anything that he did in a school, there are still teachers. Wing is the person who taught them in the Heaven's Arena arc. Then we have Bisky, who taught them in the Greed Island arc. See how you can still accomplish teaching without a school? And a lot of people give Hunter x Hunter a lot of flack for how bogged down it is in the explanation, but you cannot say that Hunter x Hunter is nothing if not precise with how it handles its power system. So I hope that by outlining this and using my literal printer ink, I was able to show you how you can have a power system that makes sense in this world, and you can't just throw everything into the wind and rule of cool and trial by fire everybody. There has to be progression from one point to another. It makes the story just feel better. It makes the story make sense too. The failure of Jujutsu Kaisen early on is incredibly evident if you look at these comparisons. JJK fails to give a structure, and this is where we see the beginning of the cracks in Jujutsu Kaisen storytelling. If we don't have a reliable way to get strong, anything or nothing at all can happen. We see Yuji being trained, so we know there's a way to get there. But that's because Yuji also lacked such basics that he needed to be caught up, and there needed to be a convenient way for us to learn how things work. And then at the end of his training, he black flashed because that's really cool. But you can't just rule of cool your way into a good story that takes itself as seriously as Jujutsu Kaisen takes itself. The interest of the debt from this bad writing will eventually need to be paid off. Look, it's just basic math. Don't throw away the plot at the earliest convenience. We're out of school. So teach us something. Teach Nobara something. Show us how characters can power up. Show us a way Nobara has gotten better at what she's doing besides one really cool, irreplicable moment when she black flashed with Yuji. Provide a way for her to get better. It really showed how Nobara wasn't important to Gege because he didn't even bother to let her participate in the plot. Yuji needed the spotlight. Megumi was grandfathered in, so the story just straight up did not bother. But I just want to say, you can't any percent a story. Just because you get to the end, that does not mean that you have done it. It does not mean that you have told a good story. It's well known that Gege wants to quickly get Jujutsu Kaisen over with. And in hindsight, it's kind of obvious in moments like this when Nobara never even got a mentor to show her the ropes and to power her up, because her arc was very clearly appear, deliver lines about being a woman, get close to Yuji, and then be sacrificed to break Yuji's mental. And let's actually move on to the next section where we talk about Nobara's wasted bangers. Actually, wait a second. I need to correct that. That's much better. The thing that baffles me the most about Nobara is this. She started off so well. She was good representation for female characters. She had a cool power. She was able to stand on her own. She had a ton of banger lines. This is the part where I compliment Jujutsu Kaisen kinda. With the context that we have now, those bangers feel at best empty and at worst almost fan service. But I'll give Gege points for trying. I already ripped him a new one in my other video, so. At the very least, it served to build up Nobara as a character because she got the spotlight for once. It also opened up the eyes of a lot of people in ways in which female characters can stand on their own and have their own motivations. She resonated with me on a very personal level. I see a lot of myself in Nobara, or at least the earlier version of her. So it's really a shame that these bangers turned out to be, for the most part, very empty. The exchange between Momo and Nobara was one that fired up a lot of people. Innumerable amount of TikToks were made about it. And I think that this line, was single-handedly responsible for Jujutsu Kaisen's reputation as a manga with a great female cast. It was weirdly nuanced in its approach. Momo recognized and represented the rigidity of society as it exists today. And for those who need to hear this, anyone who will respect you and wants you around is already doing the work or is willing to do the work to treat you as an equal. This is the school of thought that is closer to what Nobara preaches. Just be yourself. Insist on being yourself, actually. This is with the caveat that you are kind and patient with others. I've always been a big fan of this philosophy. I think at the end of the day, that there will always be people that will be upset with you. In isolation, this is a great interaction. Even in just the half episode it spanned, this showed the power and reach of the story and the values that people held. As it turns out, seeing nuanced women who have something to say kinda slaps. Insert the everyone like that meme here, because people did. Guys, girls, and everyone in between. I think this struck a chord with a lot of people. This is why I still have people in my comments defending Jujutsu Kaisen for having the best female cast, because things like this resonated with them. I will consider this in a vacuum genuinely one of the most nuanced, if not in your face, portrayals of what struggles of women are. And I think with shonen, you kind of have to be a bit in the reader's face.
I'm really glad that this exists because it tackles the nuances of the feminine experience. We have the experience of somebody like Mai, who has a lot of pressure on her shoulders because of her family and what it means to be a woman in that scenario. But we also have Nobara, who is the absolute beacon of just being yourself, the rejection of all of these expectations that are put on women from external sources. It is in isolation an incredible representation of all of these nuanced problems. This makes me wonder, how did we get to this point? How did we get to the point where we are now subject to those tropes again? How did we get to the point where we have taken the feminine icon of Jujutsu Kaisen, who has liberated herself from the expectations of women, and put her back into a trope of a woman dying for a man that she has a close, intimate relationship with, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about that right now.
And we don't just stop here. We have a very poignant fight scene and conversation that centers around Yuji and Nobara. And here we have teamwork, connection, and platonic affection exemplified between a guy and a girl. This is really important. The Black Flash fight up to the multi-page interaction between Nobara and Yuji after they killed Kechizu and Essa was a game changer for Jujutsu Kaisen. This was such a wonderful fight because it was exemplary of the relationship between Yuji and Nobara that highlighted their strengths. Nobara, who is not as strong and fast as Yuji, is supported by him carrying her out. And her response was, "I got your back." And that's how it should be. Their relationship was symbiotic, and it only continued on their fight with Kechizu and Essa. Nobara put a literal fucking nail through her arm to play chicken with their enemies, and let's be real, sweet, adorable Yuji has many traits to like, but he does not have the ability to push to the edge and then dare the other person to go further and promise she'll increase the stakes even more like Nobara does. They complement each other really well. Yuji can protect and bridge the physical gap, while Nobara can destroy their enemies not only in the mental battle, but give them the edge with her technique and strategy. We saw this in a smaller part when she was tested by Gojo earlier in the story that we talked about. She stopped Yuji from going after the cursed spirit and was able to resolve the situation seamlessly in a way that Yuji's toolkit wasn't able to. I don't know if you realize this, but dumbass Gojo didn't put a veil up before sending them into that building, so I think causing a ruckus outside was a little bit out of the question. He really hasn't changed in all these years. It genuinely feels like Yuji and Nobara are connected in their souls sometimes. They work so seamlessly together when they do take on a fight or a mission, and the two of them are often on the same page. I got a comment on my other video about how I should compare Nobara and Megumi in terms of their importance to the story because they share more similar roles, and that is just simply not the case. Megumi, by his nature, is a lone wolf. He could never fill the shoes that Nobara has in her relationship with Yuji. They are a unit working in tandem seamlessly. They experienced Black Flash, I like to believe, partly because they were so in tune with each other and in extension able to push themselves to the boundaries of what was previously achievable for them because of the security that one brought for the other. But Gege is like, it's just random. I'll stick with my reality, okay? Anyway, I think people get a little bit too wrapped up in the Naruto parallel where it's like one girl, two guys, and like one guy is like the main protagonist, whatever. But really, like the one girl and two guys is where the likeness ends between these two. It's just not the same. I don't know what else to say about that. Nobara is a main character the same way that Megumi is and Yuji is. It's an ensemble cast. Anyway, I thoroughly believe that Yuji would not have achieved Black Flash there without Nobara, and Nobara would not have achieved Black Flash without Yuji. And that narrative of the support one can bring because of their differences instead of in spite of them is a powerful message. And one that clearly also resonated with a lot of people because by and large that fight was so well received by the entire community. That fight was voted overwhelmingly excellent in a poll of over 1,000 people, and the comments in the Reddit discussion page are all quite positive about Nobara because she was so fucking badass and cool in that episode. And to top it all off, this episode still had more to give us. I mentioned platonic affection earlier, and that's not something I feel like gets talked about a lot. I feel like love gets talked about too much in the romantic sense and not enough in the friend way. Yuji is someone Nobara said basically crashed into her life, pulled up a chair, so to speak, and she welcomed him because of this connection that they have. In this arc, we got to witness Nobara at her most unhinged, literally pushing her body and mind to the limit, but we also see her tenderness with Yuji, who is clearly torn up about killing Eso and Kechizu. She doesn't dismiss his feelings, but rather offers him a perspective that could help him. And Yuji, in turn, after feeling seen and heard by her, offers up more on how he feels happy about their survival, but mourning the tears that were shed for those he killed. And in true compassion and love, Nobara offers not condolences or dismissals or niceties. No, she offers up something in the spirit of their partnership, true, raw, and honest culpability. They are accomplices. Language that inherently means they are equally responsible. She was in this with Yuji, despite having no regrets about the way things went. I want to talk about this for a second. This is such an important type of relationship to be exemplified to people. Yes, you can have a deep and meaningful connection with someone who is different from you. You can complement each other in a meaningful way that really brings out the best in each other. And yes, you can be deeply committed platonically. Guys and girls can be friends, and very intimate ones at that. I think the reason why this is so revolutionary for shonen anime manga in general is that there is such a lack of not only equal partnership, but complementary partnership that goes on without the air or hint of romanticism. Just briefly looking back at some of the anime I watched when I was growing up, Sakura was in love with Sasuke, Naruto was in love with Sakura, or Hime was very much in love with Ichigo, and Ichigo with her, even though he's kind of a dumbass about it. I love dunking on Ichigo. Anyway, nothing is wrong with being in love with someone. Romance is great. Big fan. Big fan. But it's not the only type of relationship that could be deeply motivating for people. And clearly, the platonic narrative resonated. And that's the Jujutsu Kaisen I fell in love with. Romantically, in case you were wondering. I think this is also the Jujutsu Kaisen that a lot of people remember. And unfortunately, time passes, things change, because all of this, all of the character building for Nobara resulted in very little actual character for her. Gege never gave her her own motivations and desires. Megumi wanted to rescue his sister. Yuji wanted to die so that he can save people, but Nobara wanted to escape the countryside, and she was already in Tokyo. You would think she would develop something new when she came here, but no, that was it for her. It was almost as if Gege was telling us in that moment, sorry, I have nothing else planned for this character, except for dying for Yuji.
So by that really, really long explanation, I hope it drilled in that Yuji and Nobara's relationship broke a lot of tropes. They broke a lot of the preconceived notions of what a guy-girl relationship could be in a manga. But then somehow, some way, we ended up playing right back into them as Nobara is sacrificed for Yuji. I'm getting ahead of myself. I am getting way ahead of myself. Okay. It's just really ironic for the person who liberated herself from the expectations of women and the Momo thing that we just talked about, for her to be like put back in this cage of being sacrificed to advance a man's story. And then Nobara's whole entire thing was that she wants to be herself. She wants to be true to her own goals and the things that she wants and the people that she is endeared to and is loyal to. Yuji and Maki, she even goes so far as to defend these people from the ones that want to hurt them. Like, she defends Yuji from Momo and Mai, who wanted him to be killed, who didn't view him as a person. And after all that, we don't get a goal that's unique to her. We don't get any motivations of what she wants to do. We don't have any sort of forward movement on who she is as a person. It really seems like Gege's bias is showing through. We'll talk about this later in the sacrifices section, in the meta section, but I just want to touch on it a little bit here because it's very relevant. Gege talks about how uncomfortable he is at writing women and drawing women, I think more specifically. And I think this was just a convenient exit. I think that this was a way to not have to write somebody who puts him out of his comfort zone. And I'm going to be real. This whole scenario, this whole thing with Nobara feels like it was planned for Nanami to die. I think that Gege looked at Nanami's storyline and was like, aha, it would be really great if the person who mentored Yuji and helped him become a sorcerer and then who eventually recognized him, and he has this really, really incredible, like fruitful and nurturing mentorship with, if he dies, that is a great way to break Yuji. And it's true. That is a great way to break Yuji. And then he did it again, like a few chapters later. And I think this was like a weird 2-for-1 deal with Gege. Because yes, Nobara does serve the purpose of breaking Yuji, but I think Nanami fits that role better. Again, I talk about this a little bit later. But it genuinely felt that this was not planned. That Nobara's death was kind of just like a tack on to the end of what was already a broken Yuji. Like, we could have had him break completely and have had the Toto scene straight after Nanami died, and it would still have made sense. It would have. Like, she just deserves so much better than this. She deserves to even at least have her own plot line to die to. You know, we deserve better. The story and all of this setup, all of the setup that I talked about and the ways that she breaks these tropes. The story could have used the relationship in a much better way to hurt you. In addition to all of these things, everything that was set up got contradicted because Gege wanted to rush, wanted to get to the point where he needed to be, where Yuji breaks, and then kind of just started working backwards from there instead of thinking of the setup that has been largely present in the entire story. And what made the story great? It's just really frustrating. Next section.
And unfortunately, this is where we have to talk about where and how this all now feels incredibly shallow because of how things turned out. While all of those things are still true, I really have to wonder, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where things have broken down so much from all of the excellence that there was prior? I'm so confused. And things really aren't getting better. Shibuya is really where we encounter the start of the breakdown of the plot of Jujutsu Kaisen, and by extension, Nobara. So I'm sure a lot of you are curious about this point in the web, specifically the Nanami problem. Surely, Nanami can never be a problem, but we'll get into it. Look, I am slandering my husband. And this is not clickbait. This is actually going to happen. But by and large, we're just going to be talking about what the real problem is. I just noticed that as Jujutsu Kaisen deteriorated, representation of women fell further and further away from the standard that was set earlier. Look, I understand that serializing a manga weekly is hell on earth. Nothing should be serialized weekly. But when the going gets tough, the first things to show through are the biases we inherently have that haven't been worked through. The poison is in the dose. Megami is a well-planned character with a clear thread from the start, and he is consistent in the story. He even improves through perseverance and effort from his end, though still no mentorship. His character makes sense, especially as a main character, but can we say that about any female character who is not being used as a proxy for Gega's favorite DILF? No. Nobara's story and character in comparison doesn't hold the same consistency as Megami. Her story and character deteriorates heavily in service of where Jujutsu Kaisen wants to go. She ends up sacrificed. And every woman in JJK ended up being support, erased, or sacrificed. All common tropes for women in media, which is what internalized misogyny is. Biases about women that haven't been worked through, but esper. If that's internalized misogyny, then what's overt misogyny? It's this guy. Clearly fishing in my comment section. Anyway, thankfully, our egalitarian King Gege Akutami didn't want to leave the men out of the bad writing, too. This is where we get to the Nanami problem. And trust me, this hurts me more than it hurts you. If I were to categorize Nobara as a fighter, I would describe her as ruthless, clever, and insane, and I do mean that as genuinely the highest of compliments. But this fight with Haruta, none of that was present. She was taken out by a singular punch while Nita got kicked around. And look, I love Nanami fan service more than you do. That is an indisputable fact. I will not hear any arguments otherwise. In this fight, this isn't the Nobara we know. The Nobara that has tricks up her sleeve and could very easily hold her own against this guy. I didn't see her deduce anything more than he was a mid-range fighter when the Nobara we are used to is constantly going through and tearing apart her opponents, not just mentally but strategically too. And now all of a sudden she doesn't know how to do that anymore. So why this sudden change? Was there this weird lapse in her character at that point, even if she was protecting Nita? That doesn't make her stupid and weak. This is the larger symptom of JJK's poor writing that I'm about to talk about. When Gege has something he wants in mind, he forgets how to treat the other people that surrounds that goal. The end goal here clearly is that Nanami beats Haruta. But Haruta is the type of person to go after those who are clearly weaker. Nanami has him beat, Nobara also handedly has him beat, so Haruta would never go after someone as powerful as Nanami. But the only other weaker person we could feasibly care about is Nita. But Nita is with Nobara. But if Nobara could beat Haruta, then Nanami wouldn't need to come in. So now, Nobara needs to be taken out by a singular punch to make her useless, so Nanami can come be hot. And I want you to know, from the deepest, most sincere part of my core, that my god, was it all almost worth it for this scene. That's my husband. So hot. I'm sorry. Okay, back to the video. And that's why I refer to this as the Nanami problem. To achieve the eventual end goal that Gege wants, Nanami needs to act out of character. Nanami, who grew and recognized Yuji as a sorcerer, wants to enforce grade 1 restriction on Nobara now, who, by the way, was already up for a grade 1 promotion, who has already achieved Black Flash, and who has an incredibly useful technique. Really? Do you expect me to believe that that's how Nanami would act, even if you put it under the umbrella of protecting Nobara? He wouldn't just say, she would just get in the way. While Nanami does not mince words, he's also not fucking stupid. He knows very well what Nobara is capable of. Both Megami and Yuji are there as well, so why not her? And we already know the answer. Lies in the weird inconsistencies of Jujutsu Kaisen. Is Nobara this badass fighter, or is she this damsel that the Haruta fight is making her out to be? The answer is that it does not matter, because the story itself cannot make up its own mind about what it wants to be, because it's trying to sprint as fast as it can to the ending at all costs. And that includes disrespecting its own prior setup if it serves the very thing that needs to happen right now. That is very well evidenced by the fact that we do see her return to her regular self when she fights Mahito's clone. That fight was clever, full of deductions. Then all of a sudden, the return of Nobara in the Haruta fight rears its ugly head again, even though there's a way for Nobara to have died in a way that still honors who she is as a character. We see her in this scenario. Itadori! Instead. And you say, Esper, well, this is in line with Mahito's trickery. Yes, it is. But it is not in line with Nobara's intelligence or character. She just attacked the main body of Mahito, who was taken by surprise. Take one bet on where that clone body is going. Nobara wouldn't just forget when she was so careful moments ago, and when she knows the real Mahito is right there. But even more so, a passive death. Look, death is a tricky subject, but this death is redundant, and I'm gonna say it, contrived. We've seen her lay herself down in harm's way before for the sake of others. There is a way for her to die that's far less lame than this. And there is a way for her to live and for Yuji to still break down. Imagine how much more painful it would be if Yuji himself severed the connection with Nobara because of what he witnessed with Nanami. What if he viewed these connections that he has as harmful? What if he acted on it while Nobara was still alive? What if he was frozen from defending her because he remembers that Sukuna will not let Mahito touch his soul? And now he realizes that he has failed Nobara and that she was a target because of the people that wanted to harm him. But he was now also unsure of whether he could even keep Sukuna at bay. What if we got to witness Yuji severing the connections he has with her, breaking her heart, shattering the one good relationship he has, and ultimately falling down a hole of despair while Nobara was still alive? Look, I don't want Nanami to die, but I think he serves the purpose of breaking Yuji better than Nobara, because he doesn't have that relationship with Yuji that could also act as an everlasting source of pain while he lives. As a mentor, he is ultimately and always will be a source of comfort. As a peer, Nobara's relationship with Yuji is much more volatile because they have protected each other before, and as a facet of their relationship, not as a duty of teacher to student. Disrupting the contract of their relationship one-sidedly would be ultimately incredibly painful for them both. It would also honor the setup in the beginning of the story that we got, which Gege seems to be massively fucking allergic to. Let's be real though, on the true and hidden reason why Nobara died. Her technique is too good for the story to keep her around and power her up in that moment. And that's the real reason why she had to die. She got the Gojo treatment, but Gege didn't have 2 boxes, so the guy put her in a suspended state, just like Gojo is in a suspended state. Yeah, but you didn't see that one coming. The Nobara and Gojo parallel. If you've looked at the chapters in this video, you will have seen the tinfoil hat portion of this video, and if you're new here, that means I've got a theory. We're gonna explain this, but at the end of the video. Actually, this was the first part that I wrote, but it's for last, like dessert. Look, this section is short because I can't keep talking badly about my husband, okay? I love him. Now we're on to the next one, which is sacrifice, which, if you're wondering why I was ignoring all of these things up here, it's because it all leads to how we even got to the point that we needed to sacrifice Nobara. This is where we're going to delve deep into Gege's biases. All of these things in this web. I'm actually not going to delve too deep into the actual sacrifice because I've said all I need to say about it. Rather, we're going to talk about how we got in a spot where we even needed the sacrifice to happen in the first place. This is the section where I talk about why intent matters. Fortunately, I have to break the fourth wall and acknowledge that there are outside factors that lead to all of this. Remember when I said that when the going gets tough, the first things to show through are the things that we haven't yet worked through? So we're going to talk about a few things, but we're going to start here. The official fanbook, which is in Japanese. But fear not, it's been translated twice by 2 different sources. Actually, probably more than that, but I've read 2 of the translations. There is an interview in here where Tite Kuba and Gege talks about a lot of things. And one of those things are the female characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. And I think that it rather speaks for itself that the 2 most standout quotes is when asked by Kuba about Gege's type in women, and that it must be formidable women, Gege responds with this: "No, that's just me dodging the issue. I'm aware I suck at drawing women, therefore I've put the brakes on creating so-called ladylike characters." Then Kubo asks him, could it be you have an aversion to creating female characters who conform to gender roles? I could see why people would think this. I could see why Kubo would think this. But Gege responds, well, it's not as if I prefer any archetypes in particular. If you were to ask me about my favorite female characters, I'd freeze up. Besides, I don't know if the readers even want to see ladylike or seductive female characters from me. And just from a purely objective point of view, Gege literally doesn't have a favorite female character, and he offered up that information. He wasn't asked about it. Bro doesn't think about women. Bro read Bleach that has one of the most diverse female casts. He read Bleach that has Yoruichi in it and struggles to think of a favorite female character, but he can recite the incantations of the Hados in Bleach. Let that sink in for a second. He doesn't have a female character, but he can recite the Hados in Bleach. Gege simply just does not care about the female characters, and I can say that for a fact because, well, he literally said it. I think we can all agree that this type of thinking, this philosophy makes for a truly, truly awful female cast that has left me wondering where the female cast even came from to begin with. I can't find a source for this other than it being mentioned almost as a fact within the subreddit multiple times, but a lot of people insist that Nobara was a suggestion of Gege's editor. I can't tell if this is one of those rumors that have been circulated so much that it became treated as fact, or if I just can't find a source, but I did try and look. Take it with a grain of salt. But the sad part is that it's believable that her addition wasn't ever intended. Also, if you have a source for this, I would love to read it. Put it in the comments. Or DM me on Twitter, I don't know. But the fact that Gege cannot come up with a single female character that he likes, and I repeat, while Yoruichi exists as a character, it's a rather smoking gun for the female character treatment in JJK. Nobara deserves so much better. Since Gege himself says he stays away from female characters and doesn't really know how to draw them, Nobara was in the wrong manga. And really, seemingly somehow, he gives no thoughts about any female characters. Not in just his manga, but everything. This is a pretty glaring reason as to why, one by one, each of the female characters ended up support sacrificed or erased. It's also rather telling that Gege divided up female characters into either ladylike or seductive female characters, and we somehow weirdly stumbled into a beloved female cast because he was presumably just using what he knows when creating any character. So he accidentally made his women into people. But the effect of this inevitably ran out when there was a greater influence that took over. This is common knowledge, but Gege wants to finish the manga really quickly. This is present in the manga in smaller ways, like everyone's design kind of becomes reduced to what I like to call the toji. But I'm not going to go further into that because manga spoilers. And let's be real, it's not that important. This also means that beloved side characters are going to be sidelined more often than not. Which is insane to me that Jujutsu Kaisen is inspired by Bleach. In case it wasn't obvious by the fact that Gege can recite the Hadas, like I can still do the hand signs for Sasuke's little like fire jutsu thing.
Fire style! Phoenix flower jutsu!
That I learned in middle school that shit's burned in here right next to my happy childhood memories. Anyway, Kubo Sensei is literally Mr. Side Character. I think Bleach is actually the best example of a manga we have for an ensemble cast. Every character in Bleach feels like they are living, even when we don't see them on screen, because when they come back, it feels like time has progressed for them. I don't care that this payoff took 64 chapters because it was so worth it. This scene where Chad asks Yuichi if he can carry him and run around one more time literally broke my heart. Then, when Chad gets to Soul Society, we literally see Yuichi pushing through a crowd to go say hi to Chad. Honestly, Yuichi's face just says it all. But this isn't something that we see in Jujutsu Kaisen, especially when important characters like Gojo literally get put in a box to be opened up for later use. And Gojo is a main character just like Nobara is a main character. He kind of just shunts off his main characters to the side. And while we're here, let's talk about the cast, because I've had people say that Nobara is a side character, and to that I say, come on now. The actual reality of it is that Jujutsu Kaisen only has two types of characters. Characters that are currently relevant to the plot and characters that are not, with the bias to sidelining women based on all the previous things we've talked about that Gege has admitted to himself regarding the female cast. And Nobara simply fell victim to currently not being relevant in the story and her curse technique being too much of a solution for everything that is going on right now. So she got put on ice instead of being an active part of the story and growing like she deserves. She deserves so much better. And there is one last thing that I'd like to talk about that I didn't really even have on the whiteboard. Heinous, I know. But I just want to briefly talk about Gege's disregard for his setups. I got into this fandom through my theories and analysis, but there's nothing to analyze when there's no follow-up. Gege cares more about shock value than actually following through with the setup he's done. This is why I really stopped thinking a lot of crazy theories for JJK when I used to do them damn near weekly, because I knew that they're not going to come to fruition. He will disregard everything set up so that he can get to a point in the story where he wants to be. I really should have realized this when Gojo got put in storage, but unfortunately it took me longer. I guess I was blindsided by the faith and love I have for this series. But that time is over. Ladies, lads, and bees, for old time's sake, put your tinfoil hats on because I have one last theory for you. Gege doesn't deserve this effort from me because he hasn't followed through with anything, but you guys deserve some juicy theory content. This is for you. You know that last missing finger, the one that Sukuna said Gojo probably kept to postpone Yuji's execution? I think that they're holding it to let Nobara use it to eliminate Sukuna without killing the person he's in. Are you ready? When I was rereading the Kechizu and Essa fight for this video, there was a specific line that struck me. Straw Doll's resonance effectiveness depends on the difference between the user and the target's skill level and the value of the targeted part. Resonance depends on the connection to the opponent. Nobara's ability to destroy is unparalleled. So let's talk about what was potentially lost with Nobara if she doesn't come back. This is a rarely spoken about facet of Nobara's technique. Straw Doll directly strikes the soul. If you're not convinced of this, let's do a little kanji breakdown. In Japanese, her technique is called Sure Juho, which is quite literally grass soul spell. This isn't a real word that translates to straw doll technique. Gege specifically chose this set of kanji to represent her power, and I ran this by my Japanese friend, and she said that Gege likes to pick complicated kanji and smash them together. Essentially, made up words. Which means that this was intentional or Gege just really likes cool sounding techniques. We'll never know. But putting the kanji for soul there seems incredibly intentional since there seems to be a larger theme of souls within the story. It also tracks with the way that Nobara's power works. Think about it in this way. What does the Death Womb blood paintings, humans, and cursed spirits have in common? It's not flesh, because when cursed spirits die, they vanish. That was made vividly apparent when Nobara and Yuji were fighting Essa and Kechizu. The only common thread is their soul. The only thing that Nobara can be targeting, cursed energy, flesh, and even the techniques of a person, they are all pathways that lead back to the soul. This is destruction at a core level. This was revealed to us in an even more convincing detail in the Nobara versus Mahito fight. Nobara herself knew her advantage when she was told about Mahito's curse technique. And because we know that Mahito is just all about his soul, and that is the root of his power, it's not hard to connect two and two together. Nobara's power directly attacked his soul. Mahito even recognizes this fact when he says Yuji is not his only natural enemy. In fact, I would even argue that Yuji is just his rival. Their antagonism is one of moral differences, while Nobara is Mahito's natural predator. And her power's efficacy is evident in their fight. Mahito's power allows him to repair himself. I specifically don't say heal because Mahito has explained his ability as shaping his soul into what he wants. His first fight against Nanami and Yuji ended up in a stalemate simply because he wore out his cursed energy from doing his domain expansion and also getting absolutely wrecked by Sukuna. The damage it dealt to the main body had Mahito incapacitated. This means that he was damaged beyond the surface. And yes, if you are following what I'm saying, that means that his soul was damaged. I cannot overstate how insane this power is. The soul is the building block of everything in Jujutsu Kaisen. It is the reason why Kenjaku is able to harvest Geto's memories of Gojo and formulate a plan against him. It's the reason why Mahito is able to contort and repair his body as he pleases, so long as he doesn't damage his soul. It is the reason why Sukuna is able to survive all this time, even though most of his body has long rotted away hundreds of years ago. Another interesting point is that Nobara's grandmother's technique carried her through her whole tenure as a Jujutsu sorcerer. It was also a recommendation from her to the higher-ups that let Nobara enroll in the first place. So her word carries at least some weight to it. And we can go back to that Momo fight to indirectly examine how good of a sorcerer her grandmother was, because we can directly trace Nobara's fighting ability to her because, well, you know, she got no mentorship. I'm looking at you, Gojo. Yes, you. There are a lot of flashy parts to Nobara's power. It's very explosive and destructive. It gives you a lot to look at. Because of this, it's very easy to miss the subtle nuances of Nobara's power. I only need to show you this clip of her taking a singular strand from Momo's broomstick to exemplify the true versatility of this power. With this strand and her straw doll, she disrupted Momo's control over her broom to the point where she took her out of the air. Momo's broom is not a cursed object, it is a tool manipulation via Momo's cursed energy and technique. This means that Nobara's technique can sever and disrupt Momo's connection to her cursed tool. It can sever the flow of her cursed energy. I'm not sure how deeply Gege thought about this, because this ability is absolutely bonkers. We deserve to see Nobara do better and cooler shit with her powers than we were given. We were robbed. She was robbed. Straw Doll technique has the ability to disrupt the flow of cursed energy that connects two things. Oh, and this will become so very important later on. But while I've got your gears turning, I want to redirect that energy to this aspect of Straw Doll technique. Nobara's Straw Doll technique is essentially remote detonation to all of the connected pieces of the soul. We saw this in her fight with Mahito, where she can sense where her cursed energy goes and detonates. Remember that quote? The soul is the body and the body is the soul? It's okay if you missed it, because the scene before that absolutely yanked my heart from its cage and curb stomped it. That phrase, however, is very important. That is a phrase that has been a rule in the manga in terms of how the soul relates to the body. But that is really only half of the equation. Mahito posited that the soul comes before the body, or maybe ultimately the technique decides. So our next step is to figure out what precedes Sukuna, the body or the soul, and that will dictate how Nobara will be most effective against Sukuna. Sukuna was once human, who turned himself into a cursed object to survive the passage of time so that he can be reincarnated. We don't know too much about the mechanisms in which a human could be turned into a cursed object, but what we can extrapolate from this is that Sukuna preserved his soul through his fingers. Each and every single one of these 20 fingers would logically carry a piece of his soul and also his power. I would argue, because of this, Sukuna falls in the realm of the body is the soul. There is something curious about this. From my observations, it seems that Sukuna's soul doesn't suffer from damage that Yuji takes, but the reverse isn't true. The vessel can be destroyed along with the already ingested fingers. This might have to do with the fact that their souls remain separate, but instead of the indestructible housing that it was once in, it's now in a very destructible human form. If we're on the same page here, your cute little ears should be picking up on the fact that their souls are separate. This means that there's a way to target just Sukuna's soul within Yuji's body, a line of destruction directly to his soul, his essence. But here's the best part about this whole thing. While Nobara excels, specifically at mid to short range, she does have the option to have basically infinite range. With the straw doll technique, the link to Sukuna's soul has essentially been pre-packaged for her. Because what are the fingers if not opportunities for Nobara to attack Sukuna as far away as she wants to? Little pieces of his soul for her to connect her technique to. And unlike the strongest from this time, Sukuna is not able to simply teleport to her location, so she is as safe as her distance from Sukuna, and we know that the damage is proportional to how strong the link of the object is to the person, because Gege has specifically outlined that for us in the way that her technique works, which I think is rather telling. If you're following, then you already know what I'm gonna say. With Nobara's technique, the soul of Sukuna can essentially be sniped out of the host body, because by ingesting the fingers has been absorbed by the vulnerable human body instead of residing still in the indestructible cursed object form. But honestly, the likelihood of success of this is still quite slim for a few reasons. Remember that Sukuna can hone in on the location of his own fingers, pretty much in the same way that Nobara can detect her cursed energy detonating at a further point. So the race is in destroying the vulnerable parts of Sukuna that are not in the destructible form. This would be the cleanest victory that the group can hope for in terms of what could happen with Sukuna. No further casualties, that is, if Nobara could get the cursed energy required to destroy parts of Sukuna's soul. We don't really know her true potential in terms of volume of cursed energy, but she was growing on par with Yuji and arguably even Megami, but even they don't have enough to go up against Sukuna. With Sukuna's fingers being indestructible, you may think it's futile to even attempt this. Like multiplying by 0 because no damage is just no damage, right? Well, not quite, because the two targets are not alike. The finger form of Sukuna's soul is indestructible and undamageable, but within the consumed form, it is vulnerable. We just haven't seen it yet. Straw doll technique will be used to establish that connection, and it will be a strong connection because these are literally Sukuna's ties to life itself. And according to the fanbook, the strength of the connection is what matters the most. These are parts of himself that contain his soul, and he used them to dodge death and reincarnate himself. It doesn't get any stronger of a tie than that. And I am hoping because of that the damage will be amplified because the tie is from soul to soul. So from here, once that tie has been established, resonance will be used to deliver the damage. While the original finger of Sukuna will not see any damage at all, the destructible parts of him within Yuji will be targeted. Or there is a more sinister and sadder version to this plan. Remember how Nobara was able to sever the connection between Momo and her broom? Because the vessel is functionally a tool to Sukuna, it is not his own body, but one he acquisitioned to house his soul. We've already talked about how the souls inside the body are separate. There is a chance, not a great one, but enough, in which Nobara can give control back from Sukuna so that the main body can be killed in that moment of weakness. It would be a split second, but it would be all they needed. But it would still result in a death. So if Nobara does come back, she will be the key to saving everyone. But I'm gonna be real here. I think that Gege wrote himself into a corner by making Nobara's power as versatile as it is. So that's why she's on ice right now. Whether or not she'll come back is a mystery, but he did leave himself room to bring her back in case he does need to use her in the future. But will he? Who knows? Overall, this was a pretty lame ending for Nobara, and I'm wildly disappointed where our main girl ended up. On ice someday, or never, to be seen again. We don't even have the closure to know if she's actually dead or not. And she deserves so much more than just being used to break Yuji. She deserved to have her own stories, motivations, and character explored. But instead, we're left with this. Hey, I'm back. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. It makes me very happy when you guys comment and I see my subscriber number go up because bigger number, better person. Yes, I watch Ludwig. Also, I want you all to know that the whole time I was wearing 4 5-inch heels that I was recording this video because it was the only way to be level with the whiteboard. So this is actually how tall I am. All right. Anyway, if you want to watch another video, here is the one that I did on all of Jujutsu Kaisen's female cast. This one is a manga one. And then if you want to start another series because you're disillusioned by this one, I don't blame you. Here is a video essay that I did on Witch Hat Atelier, which is spoiler free. So yeah, I'll see you in those videos. Bye.